What is Project 2025? Why are so many people scared of it? And what does this infographic have to do with spreading misinformation, disinformation, and in some cases outright lies? Project 2025 is a vision document that was created by conservative research institution, the Heritage Foundation. This document is a playbook, or maybe more like a wish list, to create a roadmap for the first 180 days in the event of a new conservative president in office. The document is about 900 pages long and contains items as mundane as how the White House Chief of Staff works and how many ships should be in the U.S. Navy. And I plan to do a companion video where I talk about the military and intelligence components in that Project 2025 document and what it could mean for America. Now, this video is probably going to get shared a lot, so allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ryan McBeth. I'm a software engineer that specializes in artificial intelligence, specifically to root out disinformation online. And you know who else helps me fight disinformation? Ground News. So I'm sitting at the airport waiting for a flight, and my mom texts me about that Algerian female boxer. And my mom is basically retired, and all she does is watch CNN all day. And this has turned her into one of the most misinformed people in my life. So I'm going to send her an article I found on Ground News from the BBC, which is considered centrist and of high factuality. So go to ground.news/RyanMcBeth and subscribe through my link to get 40% off a Vantage plan. That's the same one that I purchased. Yeah, I actually bought Ground News. They do not give it to me for free. Ground News aggregates the news. So they'll give you a summary of a news event, but they'll also give you the biases of each source, left, right, center, whatever. And they also give you the ownership data of each publication, so you know who is telling you what to think. And also, this blind spot report is pretty cool. It's a page dedicated to finding stories that you may have missed due to your own personal biases. It also comes in a newsletter that gets right to your email inbox. So go to ground.news/RyanMcBeth to stay fully informed and subscribe through my link for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is the same one that I purchased. Now let's get back to talking about active measures and Project 2025. When it comes to this stuff, I am apolitical. I'll go after right-wing trolls like End Wokeness and DC Drano for posting Russian propaganda the same way I'm going to go after the person who created this infographic. Now, this infographic seems to have popped up online on or about July 4th, 2024. The document appears to be a primer of sorts for the Project 2025 objectives. If you look at the colors of the infographic and the prominent position of presidential candidate Donald Trump, it appears that this document was constructed as sort of a phony document that may have been leaked by the conservatives precisely so that people on the left would be outraged by it. Creating fake documents which are designed to be leaked is a common Russian tactic. It's called an active measure. The anti-Semitic Protocols of the Elders of Zion was a Russian active measure. So was the rumor that AIDS was a bioweapon that was created at Fort Detrick, Maryland. And so was the allegations of American bioweapons labs in Ukraine. Now, this infographic is freaking amateur hour. There's numerous factual mistakes, which I will go over. And, you know, it's almost like some guy just read the Project 2025 document, or maybe skimmed it, and just threw a bunch of Handmaid's Tale talking points on a graphic, hoping that most of them would be correct or that nobody would check. Well, hi, I'm the guy who checks. Now, looking at the infographic itself, it seems like this document was created by a person who does have a command of English. Everything is spelled correctly. There's really no obvious grammar or punctuation mistakes, although birthright is spelled birthright. But the biggest indicator that this is an active measure type document is the lack of attribution. Authentic documents put out by the Heritage Foundation would have a link back to their creator or a URL where you can go to learn more about Project 2025. So it's almost like the person writing this document did not want you to go out and get more information. They want you to read this document, be terrified, and share it. The document is designed as outrage bait for people who only have surface level knowledge of Project 2025 and the issues involved. So did Russia have a hand in making this document? I can't prove it, and I don't think so, but I think it may be more likely that this was constructed by someone on the left as an active measure. They may not even understand that what they're doing is wrong. Now, it seems like the first instance of this document appeared on Imager by a user named dgingerlori64.
Based on that account's post history, it appears this account is primarily interested in leftist politics. And that's kind of where the trail ends. The document was then made popular by left-wing political pundit Christopher Hahn, who received 4.9 million views as of me writing this. Note that I actually reached out to Christopher Hahn. I asked him if he was aware that this document was likely an active measure. Mr. Hahn did not respond. Sometimes silence speaks volumes. If you don't care that a document that you are promoting is a lie because it serves your agenda, you're probably not one of the good guys. So let's go over each of the document's claims and see if there's any truth behind it. Now, note the infographic and the page references as well as the complete 900-some Project 2025 playbook is available at ryanmcbeth.substack.com for free. In order to evaluate the truth of this infographic, we actually have to take a look at the Project 2025 document, and I read it, all 900-some pages. And also note that just because the Heritage Foundation wants to do something doesn't mean it's actually going to be able to get it done. Implementing some of these items would require all of Congress to get on board and the Supreme Court to agree that the laws are constitutional. So let's start with the first claim, no-fault divorce. The text divorce only appears on page 51, and it is in the context of funding, as in divorcing policies and the funding needed to implement them. So no-fault divorce is not found in the document, much less ending no-fault divorce. If your infographic is starting out with an obvious lie, that probably doesn't bode well for the rest of your document. The second item is complete ban on abortions without exception, and this is partially true. But not once does the document advocate banning abortion in the general sense. Instead, the document says on page 6, alternative options to abortion, especially adoption, should receive federal and state support. Note that on page 104, there's text that says, the use of public monies for transgender surgeries or to facilitate abortion for service members should be ended. So that's kind of the closest thing you get to a ban, though this really only refers to service members, people who serve in the military. There are sections about defunding Planned Parenthood from Medicaid dollars and prohibiting federal funds for being used for abortion travel. And that means federal funds being used to transport someone from a state with very restrictive abortion laws to a state with fewer abortion laws. That way they can obtain an abortion. The next claim is ban contraceptives. And this isn't just a lie, this is a pants on fire lie. There is text in the document which advocates for supporting and restoring religious and moral exemptions to the contraceptive mandate under the Affordable Care Act. You can find that on page 484. In a nutshell, there are some organizations who do not believe in birth control, and they were essentially forced to offer birth control on their health plans by the federal government. Changing this would allow certain companies who do not believe in contraception to offer healthcare plans without such contraceptive prescription coverage. Next is additional tax breaks for corporations on the 1%. This is partially true. Now, this is kind of the first clue that this is an active measure because the term 1% isn't used by the 1%. And by the way, when I say 1%, that refers to the top 1% of earners in the U.S. So in order to be part of the 1%, you need to bring in an annual salary of $600,000 a year, roughly. Now, there is a section that says Treasury should work with Congress to simplify the tax code by enacting a simple two-rate individual tax system of 15% and 30% that eliminates most deductions, credits, and exclusions. And then later it goes on to suggest lowering the corporate tax rate to 18%. This would likely benefit the rich, but it would also benefit small businesses. Next is higher taxes for the working class. And this is actually partially true. There's nothing in the document that specifically advocates higher taxes for the working class. However, the two lowest tax brackets are 10% and 12%. And that is for people making $11,000 a year and $45,000 a year, respectively. Those people would see their taxes raised to 15%. But again, this is designed to simplify the tax code so that everybody, regardless of how much you make, either pays 15% or 30%. Next is elimination of unions and worker protections. This is a lie. This actually doesn't appear in the document, although there is a section on page 81 that talks about how hard it is to fire government workers who are underperforming. And it makes suggestions to expedite the process of terminating underperforming government workers. But it's obvious that the statement in the infographic implies eliminating all private sector unions, not making it easier to fire underperforming government employees. Next is raising the retirement age, and this is a pants-on-fire lie. The document does not contain anything about raising the retirement age. The document does mention that on page 77 there may be opportunities to save money by moving towards things like thrift savings plans instead of traditional pensions for government workers, but nothing about raising the retirement age. Next is cut Social Security. This is a pants-on-fire lie. There isn't a single mention in the document of cutting Social Security.
Cut Medicare.
This is pretty much, again, a pants-on-fire lie as well. Next is end the Affordable Care Act. This is a lie. I couldn't find anything in the document of ending the Affordable Care Act. There was text on page 469 about separating the subsidized ACA market from the unsubsidized market to promote insurance competition. There's also a section on removing restrictions for physician-owned hospitals. Now, I didn't know about this, but apparently there are some physician-owned hospitals that specialize in certain procedures like cardiology or orthopedics. And it appears that under the ACA, Medicare won't reimburse these hospitals for procedures. So I guess this was done to prevent these small physician-owned hospitals from performing procedures that weren't really needed and then just billing Medicaid like a factory. Or maybe this was a gift to large hospital corporations to decrease competition. But it doesn't seem like Project 2025 intends to repeal the ACA. Next is raise prescription drug prices. There is no explicit language that calls for raising prescription drug prices, but this might be partially true because of a technicality or an effect of a law they want to implement. But the closest thing I can see is page 465, which talks about ending government price controls on drugs that are available for Medicare, which I suppose would increase prices if you eliminate the price control. But it sounds like what the government wants to do is negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies instead of just having a fixed price. But I found a section on page 456 which also talks about generic drugs, which indicate that the document wants the FDA to go after companies that kind of slow walk the entrance of generic drugs into the marketplace. So that right there could probably lower costs. So this might be a wash. Next is eliminate the Department of Education. We finally have a truthful statement. It's on page 319. I think the basic idea here is that the Department of Education is supposed to drive federal education policy, but most education is driven by the states. So the Department of Education has turned into this bloated bureaucracy that doesn't actually perform their core mission. At least that's what this document claims. And so the idea is to just eliminate the department and do things like move scholarship grants into the Department of Labor. But this is the first genuinely true item I've seen so far. Next is use public taxpayer money for private religious schools. So this is somewhat true, and it kind of goes back to school vouchers. The idea here is that if your child is in a public school that is not performing well, you can take the money that would be normally allocated toward that public school and you can send your child to private school with that money instead. Oftentimes these private schools are religious institutions like Catholic schools. And you often hear this in the terms of school choice. Next is teach Christian religious beliefs in public schools. The word Christian only appears in the document 6 times, none of which talking about Christian religious beliefs being taught in schools. This is an outright lie. Next is end free and discounted lunch programs. And this is partially true. Page 302 talks about how school lunch programs are originally designed to provide food to children from low-income families while at school, but these programs are now servicing middle-class and upper-class families. I think the main issue here is something called the community eligibility provision, which means that if 40% of students in a school or school district are eligible for federal meals, all students in that school or school district can receive free meals. And in some cases, this makes sense. I once dated a teacher who taught in Prince George's County, Maryland, where a significant number of parents were from Central America and they could not read in English or Spanish. So asking them to fill out a free meal form, that just ain't going to happen. Their kid's just going to go hungry. And sometimes school lunches make a lot of sense in a case like that. But it sounds like what the Department of Agriculture has done is interpret the law so that if 40% of students in a district meet the criteria, the entire district gets free lunches no matter their income level. So whether this is right or wrong, the original text of end free and discounted lunch programs is a lie. It's not ending, it's just being focused on children who actually need the services. Next is end civil rights and DEI protections in government. So this is a mixed truth, and I think a lot of it has to deal with that you have two separate issues on the same line: civil rights and DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, there's nothing in this document about ending civil rights protections in government. But I will tell you this, DEI is mentioned 39 times, mostly with the issue of preventing politicalized or social agendas by agencies that have no reason to promote those agendas. And I can tell you that the Heritage Foundation is deathly afraid of DEI efforts. There's a section on page 358 which calls for a general accounting of federal programs that spread DEI or CRT, critical race theory, and gender ideology. So this is of mixed factuality. Next is ban African American and gender studies in all levels of education. This is a lie. Now, there is a section on page 343 that talks about preventing students and teachers from being required to believe that they are guilty or responsible for the actions of others based on race or ethnicity, but there is no blanket ban on African American or gender studies. Next is ban books and curriculum about slavery. This is a lie. The word slavery only appears once in the document, and the text appears on page 14, which says, "Left to our own devices, the American people rejected European monarchy and colonialism just as we rejected slavery." But there is no ban on books or curriculum about slavery. Next is ending climate protections. This is of mixed factuality. On page 419 through 426, the role of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, is laid out, and the basic idea is to move away from environmental advocacy and moving towards ensuring compliance and enforcement of existing laws. Next is increased Arctic drilling, and this is somewhat true as well. Page 390 talks about the Arctic Energy Office and a strategic plan for the responsible development of Alaska's energy assets. So yes, this probably equates to more drilling for oil in Alaska. Next is to regulate big business and the oil industry. This is partially true, but it needs context. Page 884 talks about positive plans for freeing the private sector from overblown government interference and regulation could, we believe, result in an explosion of entrepreneurial activity. And page 855 talks about eliminating unnecessary regulations. And one of the fears of this document are that federal bureaucracies have grown so big that they just kind of make up their own rules in order to justify their existence. So the document does advocate for relaxing regulations in general, especially where regulations don't make any sense or where they're put in place in order to satisfy a political ideology or bureaucracy. Next is promote and expedite capital punishment. This is true. It's on page 554, and it says the next conservative administration should therefore do everything possible to obtain finality for the 44 prisoners currently on federal death row. Now, this is with the idea that providing this punishment without ever enforcing it provides neither justice for the victims nor the defendant. Now, the document also admits that Congress needs to revisit whether the death penalty is appropriate at all. But until then, the prisoners who are on death row should have their sentences carried out. Next is end marriage equality. This is a lie. There isn't a single line that talks about ending marriage equality. Then we have condemn single mothers while promoting traditional families. This is of mixed factuality. There isn't anything about condemning single mothers, but the document does talk about promoting traditional marriage as the best solution for family stability. Defund the FBI and Homeland Security. So this is true, although it's more histrionics than truth, and it needs context. The infographic makes it sound like the Heritage Foundation wants to eliminate the FBI and Homeland Security. In reality, what they want to do is streamline non-law enforcement functions of the FBI and eliminate redundancies. You can find that on page 551, where they say badges over bureaucracy. The Department of Homeland Security is another animal, and the paper talks about how the idea to create the department 20 years ago was supposed to create this cohesive department where they could bring everything under one roof, but it never quite worked. You can find that on page 133. It also wants to combine all of America's separate immigration agencies into one agency to remove redundancies. They suggest moving the Coast Guard into either the Department of Justice or the Department of Defense. And they also want to divide the Secret Service into a protective branch and a financial branch. and also privatize the TSA. All of that can be found on page 134. Next is use the military to break up domestic protests. This is a lie. There isn't a single line about this anywhere in the Project 2025 document. Next is mass deportation of immigrants and incarceration in camps. So some of this is true, although it literally focuses on immigrants that enter the country illegally. Specifically on page 135, it talks about prioritizing border security and immigration enforcement, including detention and deportation. And on page 143, the document talks about increasing bed space for detainees to 100,000 beds. Finally, page 142 talks about civil arrest, detention, and removal of immigrant violators anywhere within the U.S. Next is end birthright citizenship. This is a lie. I looked over this entire document and the word birthright only appears once, and that's on page 803, which talks about it in the context of optimism, home, and confidence. There is a section on preventing human trafficking by repealing Section 235 of the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008, but that's more about the procedures of safely repatriating children. Next is ban Muslims from entering the country. This is a lie. There is nothing in the document that references this. Next is eliminating federal agencies like the FDA, EPA, or NOAA. And this is partially true. The document does not recommend eliminating the FDA or EPA. However, it does recommend eliminating NOAA, or the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, and placing its functions within other agencies. Finally, we have continue to pack the Supreme Court and lower courts with right-wing judges. This is a lie. Project 2025 does not contain any plan for packing the Supreme Court with right-wing judges. Now, I can tell you this. Conservative presidents tend to appoint conservative justices. Liberal presidents tend to appoint liberal justices. And that's just kind of how the American system works. But sometimes judges don't work out as expected. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, he was appointed by Ronald Reagan as a conservative justice, and he was often the swing vote on the court. So just because you appoint a justice doesn't mean that they'll always have a conservative opinion on all issues. Doesn't mean they'll vote the way you want them to vote every single time. So if we look at the totals, there are 5 true statements in this infographic, 10 partial truths, and 14 outright lies. This leads to a truth score of 17%, and this is pretty bad. If you have to make up 83% of your allegations against an opposing political party, you might want to revisit what you stand for. Using the same active measure tactics as Russia isn't right, no matter whether you're liberal or conservative or somewhere in between. So hey, if you want to support my work fighting disinformation from all sides, head on over to ryanmcbeth.substack.com, where you can get access to a lot of extra materials for only $5 a month. And you know, I wrote a story called Warlock. It's actually kind of a bestseller on Amazon Kindle, which is kind of weird. The story is about an Irish traveler who's hired by the FBI to catch the world's most wanted criminal in Afghanistan. You can get it for only 99 cents. Thank you guys so much for watching.
Oh, wow! Daddy's cigarettes! If I smoke these, I'll be cool!
Hey kid, what are you doing?
Think tank!
You know kid, smoking isn't cool, but t-shirts, stickers, and hoodies from Bunker Branding sure are.
Wow! Alcoholics moving cargo! Awesome!
Intel Life, Aerosol, Live Laugh Launch for Destroyer, Trident, HIMARS, and Patriot. Think outside the bomb. Drone Sweet Drone, Department of the Boat People, landmines, and even the tow missile. It would behoove you to grab one today. I better take these. Don't worry, I'll destroy them by burning. And remember, Bunker Branding is cool.
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle. Bunker Branding!